This is Friday Evening's Undercard. On our wrestling show today, Eric and I talk about upcoming special shows covering WrestleMania, the Crockett Cup, and the resurgence of wrestling outside the WWE. Welcome everyone to Friday Evening's Undercard. I'm Gentleman John. He's Electrifying Eric. We're your hosts. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, man. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. A little special episode. We had to change the plans a little bit because you got to go do that real job that makes that real money, and not this little podcast thing. And so, just so we can get something out tomorrow, and we'll get the good episode out in short order here. But we're going to talk about some ideas that we have coming down the pipe, leading into WrestleMania and leading into the Crockett Cup that we are going to be attending.
Yeah, I think, as this podcast is evolving, we have, ideas of what we want to do, because, we've both been lifelong fans of the industry, and I think there's ample material to talk about, and I think certainly with it being WrestleMania season, we would be remiss if we did not talk about WrestleMania. And I think also, going to the Crockett Cup, talking about really, I think one of the kind of more underappreciated classic events in pro wrestling history.
Absolutely. And the whole thing with WrestleMania this year sort of ties in a bunch of ways. But first, we'll start with a show that, how long have you and I been talking about doing one of these best of shows?
Oh, man. Years at this point.
Didn't we actually talk about doing this like when you and I and Andrew were down in New Orleans for Mania 30?
I think we did. So we're talking like 5 years ago now.
Yeah, so that's 5 years. So the idea for this is that we'll go through all of the now 34 WrestleManias and pick out the best WWEF championship match. Pick out the best match for the Intercontinental Championship, the best tag team championship match. Eric and I will do that, and we won't know what the other one is doing until we're live on the mics. And then we'll just discuss, what the other thinks, really.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. We've also talked about doing like the ultimate WrestleMania card, which I think this could even, if this goes well, who knows, maybe we even spin off into that. So, because I think there's so many ways you can look at it too. With 34 WrestleManias, there's a wealth of material there to go through.
And obviously a lot of stuff to be debated about that. Where do certain wrestlers fall in the matches? Do you have somebody like Hulk Hogan in the main event for the championship in one of his numerous championship matches? Or do you have Hulk going against somebody else, not for the championship?
You could argue, there's two ways you can look at it. You could have, I think you could make a good argument and have Hogan and Andre for the title as your main event. You could pull that off, and I think it would not be bad. I think, or do you put a match, we'll say Hogan against The Rock, which was an incredibly compelling match.
And certainly Hogan against The Rock was the one where, I was leaning towards, because that's two awesome superstars that you can get in the ring. And that's one of those moments that, we could really debate back and forth on of who are you going to put where. Yeah.
And so I think we could look at it something like that. There's any number of ways we could do this. And I think if anything, hopefully, some of our choices might create some debate, on our social media as well, and
absolutely,
which is always good, because if there's one thing wrestling fans have, it's opinions.
Yes, that is for sure. Just a quick break in the action, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Instagram at Friday Evenings Undercard, on Twitter at FUndercard, on Facebook by going to facebook.com/Friday Evenings Undercard. You can reach us via email at fridayeveningsundercard@gmail.com. Please have a listen to our interviews with Ohio Valley Wrestling stars Tony Gunn, Sam Thompson, King's Ransom, and Callie. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us that 5-star review on iTunes. It'd mean a lot to us. Now, let's get you right back to the action. And so the other thing, obviously, with WrestleMania being in New York this year, I'm not sure if the listeners have heard, but a promotion not named WWE is running Madison Square Garden. And I mean, what do you think, Eric? Is that like a big deal or something?
I mean, I think it is at a certain level because, I mean, let's face it, Madison Square Garden is kind of viewed as WWE's, sort of home field, if you will. This is well before probably many of our fans and even us for a large part. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, when New York was really their hub, Madison Square Garden kind of came to symbolize that. I mean, WrestleMania 1 was there. And I think anytime WWE has a show in MSG, it's a big deal. Even a house show. I mean, we went to one a couple years ago, which was a great show. Not probably your typical house show. Just because of where it is, it adds that certain element. So I think having another promotion there, it is a big deal. Because I think, you can talk about whether it be sports, entertainment, music. You play the Garden, that's a big deal.
Yeah, the Garden is obviously a huge deal.
I mean, we're talking probably the most famous arena in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, almost without debate, honestly. Yeah, that's a hard one to debate.
I mean, I remember, when we were walking through the Garden, what was cool, I guess it was the second level of the Garden, they had that timeline of every day of the week of what happened at the Garden. And a lot of these moments you're like, man, that happened here? That too? I mean, it was like everything from politics to sports to entertainment to music, you name it, there were big events that have taken place there. So to have anybody play the Garden is, I think, a big deal.
Definitely. And, it's Ring of Honor. And just outside of this whole Madison Square Garden thing of now Ring of Honor and New Japan running, and you can argue whether who's like the real draw for this show. I have my view of who the draw is for this MSG show, and I've taken some heat for that, but it is what it is. Either way, whether or not Ring of Honor and New Japan could draw 20,000 people to the Garden without WrestleMania in town is sort of neither here nor there. At the end of the day, there has been, really within the last year, a huge resurgence in non-WWE wrestling in America.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think it's been kind of building. I think even for the last 10 years, and you've had some great stuff down at Ring of Honor, New Japan, but I think now it's really coming to the forefront where I wouldn't say that these promotions, they're not the equal of WWE, at least in the public consciousness. But I think, if anything, from the business side, there have been a number of guys that have proven you can make a career on the independents and not go to New York.
And that's true. And in some ways, the whole independent thing is, I don't know, it's a little odd now because WWE is obviously its own thing, and they are, whether they want to say they are or not, they're at the heart, they are still a wrestling company. Mm-hmm. But everybody else more or less has a parent company, and obviously Impact has their parent company, Ring of Honor has Sinclair. Mm-hmm. So with those, that's why I use like non-WWE, because I would say your big three below WWE, that being Impact, Ring of Honor, and MLW, not necessarily in that order, by the way. Mm-hmm. Those I don't necessarily would consider an independent.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, all of them have a very real business model. They all have, and I use this term, legit businesses to answer to. Not saying that wrestling's not legitimate, but, it's not just, hey, we're running a promotion out of the Armory down the street.
Right. And then obviously I don't know if I'm leaving out or forgetting or how you want to describe it, All Elite. I don't know.
I think they're more of a hybrid. I mean, they are, I think certainly, a lot of the cases, like you think about Ring of Honor with Sinclair. Why does Sinclair want that? It gives them programming. And that's been from the earliest eras of television, what has been the staple on television has been pro wrestling.
In a lot of markets, absolutely.
Pro wrestling, game shows, and soap operas. That, if you want to look at something that are like the dinosaurs that are still with us today of television, it's that. And I think, I think about TBS for years. Wrestling was the backbone of that channel. You go anywhere in the American South and say 605, everybody knows what you mean.
Everybody who's our age, yes.
Yeah. It's a big deal. And I think, so that makes sense that, hey, it provides content for Sinclair that's actually relatively cheap to produce. It's not, you're not having to spend a ton of money to do it. So it works out well. But I think All Elite, they've taken this kind of sentiment that's been building in the last decade, and they've now found basically a billionaire to back it up, which is an interesting dynamic. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how that develops moving forward. I mean, it's probably too early to say that, it's going to be the Monday Night Wars version 2.0, but I think when wrestling's at its best is when there's competition.
And, that's my whole thing with AEW is like, hang on, guys. Let's tap on those brakes a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the guys from AEW, but like the fans who are going crazy about it. Okay, yes, it's being run by Cody and the Bucks and Omega. Yes, they sold out that building in Chicago with basically the same crew that they're going to run this show in Vegas. Okay, they're going to have Conrad Thompson out there again doing his big podcast convention. It's going to be Cody. It's going to be the Bucks. Penta is probably going to be there unless he's contracted somehow, but I don't know how that's going to work. Whatever. It's basically going to be the same crowd they ran the All In show with. But what are they going to do after that?
That's the big question. And, as you're saying that, I think you really nailed it on the head. It's the same crew that ran the Chicago show.
There's only so many dream matches you can do. There's only so many dream matches Chris Jericho's ever going to be able to work again.
Yeah.
And of course, as I understand it, he made some, really great amount of money. I don't think it's been disclosed, but he said it was a really great amount of money. But, where do they go?
Yeah, and I think what's going to be interesting is, it's one thing if you're doing kind of these super card matches, in these shows. But what's going to happen when you have to start doing, weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly television? That's when you got to have stories. That's when you got to really, that'll be interesting to see.
And that's been my whole thing is okay, yeah, they can do some big hot shot where they get essentially every name talent in the world not signed by WWE to go to Chicago for one weekend. Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. And that's kind of what everybody knew it was going to be, and that's why it sold out. That's what everybody knows this thing in Vegas is going to be, and that's why it's sold out. So if they just want to do 3 or 4 shots a year where they just do these super cards and you just go see a bunch of athletes doing their thing, then, I don't know where they go.
Yeah, and I think, at a certain level, too, for the more, I think it'd be interesting. We could probably do an entire show of types of wrestling fans, and it's for I think your more casual fan. You're going to have some stories. You're going to have that kind of more entertainment draw. Not everybody just cares about a 4 or 5-star classic match, and
even to that, what's a 4-star, 5-star match? Because I go back and I bought All In. I go there and I look and okay, who was it? Yeah, and see, well, there you go. I mean, that shows how memorable it was. Omega and Pentagon Jr. did this really athletic looking match, but it didn't make me care objectively as far as the moves and crazy here, there, and everywhere around the ring. Yeah, that match was probably better than Cody Rhodes against Nick Aldis, but I remember Cody Rhodes against Nick Aldis.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes down to that wrestling at its core, and we kind of touched on this, we talked about WrestleMania 3. It's about the story. It's that emotional connection, what they're trying to convey to the audience. And I think, there's some talented performers there. And they have shown that they can be part of storylines, and, I'm sure they will eventually evolve to that. But I think, they are now at a certain, at least financially, this is probably one of the better situations we've seen in a long time for a company. That's also, we are going to be a wrestling company. It's not, we're part of the portfolio.
Right.
And I think also, basically the backers in some respects have almost a feeling of Ted Turner back in the 80s. of an actual fan that's backing this. You look at some of the issues that, of course we could do entire, years worth of stuff on what went wrong with WCW. But I think the problem WCW had at the end was they were just part of AOL Time Warner's portfolio. That doesn't always work out. But I think in this case, you got somebody that's motivated and they have a lot of money. And they do have some talent. Now, can they put it all together and make this magical recipe that works? Maybe or maybe not. That remains to be seen. But I go back to that point of competition, I think, where wrestlers have the chance to go to different promotions. That's good for them because it's not just one show in town. And I think it'll be, hopefully this leads to good products across the board, maybe a little bit of a renaissance. And we're starting to kind of even see that with WWE. Some of the changes to the writing staff, people they're bringing in. At the very least, the awareness that the product has not been that great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I can't help but think that's not because of these other promotions starting to gain some traction.
But you had a good comment a second ago about the wrestling fans that you want to try to do. And this goes to something that sort of started this whole thing up for me is where do these promotions want to be, right? So here's the thing. Obviously, we've been covering Ohio Valley Wrestling on the show. Well, they just did the big show that they co-promoted with Impact. Sold out the Davis Arena for the first time in a long time. I think it hasn't been released. You can look at the crowd. You can't seat any more in there. 400, maybe 500 people in the building. And, that was a packed house, right?
Yeah, certainly.
So here's the thing that just really sets it off to me, and I don't know if you saw this. The night before, Impact co-promoted a show with, I don't remember what the name of the promotion is, Rockstar Pro Wrestling or something, out of Dayton, Ohio. This professional wrestling show embarrasses me to say I went to school in Dayton, Ohio. But you have OVW sitting over here. They've got their own building. They've got a professional-looking TV set up, and they run a good show in front of about 500 people. And then the night before, with basically the same crowd, because John Morrison was there, Brian Cage was there, Madison Rayne was there, all those big names that drove down to Louisville to run that show were in Dayton. And it was in front of maybe 150 people in a meeting room. Yeah, you can say you were at the Dayton Convention Center. Look, man, you were not in the convention hall at the Dayton Convention Center. You were in one of the freaking side meeting rooms, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, they got to clear. You got to clear the ring because you got to get Amway in there tomorrow.
Yeah, that's like Ring of Honor saying they ran the Norfolk Scope. Cornette's told this story. Yeah, sure, they ran the Norfolk Scope. They were in a warehouse underneath the building. They were their address for that show was the Norfolk Scope, or in this case, the Dayton Civic Center Convention Center. But you were not in the big room of this building.
And I think what's interesting, and you talk about this, with promotions working with other promotions. Talk about, sort of a blast from the past of promotions sharing talent. Kind of the old NWA model. The champ will go to your territory. He might be in St. Louis this week. Next week he's out west, or he'll go down to Texas for a run, goes into Louisiana. It's an interesting way of doing things. And I think, if anything, there was this period when the Monday Night Wars ended. WCW's gone. There's kind of this now what for wrestling fans.
And so for me, the thing with that Dayton show, and I watched a portion of it and I just had to turn it off. Did you see the clip on Twitter that Cornette was talking about where the guy listen, I don't want to talk bad about people that are not in shape, shall we say? But listen, the guy looks like late stage Yokozuna.
Right.
And I'm not talking about what's the guy that comes out in the sumo cloth with the fart gimmick?
Oh gosh.
Not him.
Rikishi?
No, no, not Rikishi. He's a new guy in TNA.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll give you a backstory on this guy real quick because I know you got to go. When I went to that WrestleCade in Winston-Salem, they had this humongous battle royal, and they had to have 60 people in the ring to start the thing. And there were so many people in the ring, you could actually see the ring sagging.
That's never a good sign.
And so it was like one of those Titanic battle royals. That's what Cornette calls them. So you hear this over the intercom. it sounds like a fart, right? And here goes everybody jumping out of the ring, and here's this unathletic-looking, obese Asian guy standing in the middle of the ring because that's his gimmick, apparently. I had to look that up because I had never heard of the guy. So that's his gimmick, is that he farts on people, right?
This is truly the sport of kings. I mean,
so
only in pro wrestling, like this, like, I mean, you know.
The other guy, the other guy, the one that was on the show in Dayton, and I don't know, Falaba, that's the guy's name, Falaba, and the ba comes from he beats his head and says ba.
Nice.
So anyway, this other guy, his gimmick is that he hits the ropes, and he takes off running at the other side of the ropes, acting like he's going to do a suicide dive out onto this mass of people. Except, as I stated before, he looks like 1999 Yokozuna. So, I mean, you can do the math there. This guy ain't going to the floor, okay? So he makes this stupid, like, slow crawl through the top and the middle rope, and then he stands on the ring apron for a little while everybody outside the ring is just standing still. And then he sits down on the ring apron. I'm not kidding. Sits down on the ring apron, and then he like kind of just hunches himself up and does a double axe handle on somebody, and the 25 people in attendance pop for him. So here's where I was going with this. Where do you want your promotion to be? And this started with the whole AEW thing. Where do you want your promotion to be? Because we're in Dayton, Ohio. Okay, anybody that's a basketball fan knows there's a pretty big arena in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, University of Dayton Arena holds 14,000 people or something. And
not only that, holds NCAA tournament games.
Holds tournament games. Legitimately, this is a famous arena, right? And it's 2 miles. I mapped this out. It's 2 miles. I knew it was close because I kind of know the geography of Dayton. It is 2 miles away from this convention center where they were running. To me, you should want your promotion to grow to a point that you can run that arena down the road, right? That should be your goal. That should be the goal for any promotion, is you want to run the big arena in your area. It may take you 10 years to get there in whatever. And I got another little side thought about this. But listen, if you've got people that look like Yokozuna doing slow motion, idiotic garbage, and I'm just going to call it what it is, garbage, like that, you're never going to get to that arena, because anybody that is anybody in that city is going to look at this and say, what is this? What's this crap? And then they're going to turn it off.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I think that's the question any promotion has to ask themselves. What do you want to be? Where's your role in the pro wrestling ecosystem, so to speak? And, I think you should always, you should always want to get better. But I think, to me, the size of the arena doesn't always necessarily matter. It's the type of crowd that you're getting. And, we've seen, there's been shows that are in relatively small arenas, but man, they're hot. It's a good crowd. The show comes off looking like $1 million.
Well, okay, so yes, but obviously we're kind of talking about either WCW or WWF shows here. They are basically running the biggest building in town.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, in some cities where they have 2 big buildings, I guess it may be easier to get into one or the other, and so they may not run the bigger because the other one's a little easier to get into. But either way, they're not going to the 3rd and 4th tier arenas, right?
No.
And they're definitely not going to the frickin' meeting room in the convention center.
Yeah, and I think, in no way are we taking away from the performers that are there. I don't want anybody to think that, we're bashing the people that are performing in those places. But I think it's also, you have to look at, what product are you putting forward? What's going to draw people? What's going to draw that attention to you? And, I think I don't think there's going to be any company that will ever be able to compete with WWE. Just between production level, between, what they can do week in and week out. I just don't see that. You're talking about a New York stock traded company. You're not competing with that, but you don't necessarily have to. And I think if you want to be a more match-driven promotion, you can do that. If you want to be a ridiculous storyline promotion, you can do that. I think this new era does give promotions that freedom, but I think in the end it needs to be what's going to get us to that next level, what's going to move us forward to, like you said, move from the third biggest arena in town to the second biggest arena to maybe we're selling out the big house, down the road.
Yeah, and so like for me, that's the thing is what's the goal? Yeah, and so that's what's on the horizons for us as far as what we want to do. We talked about it a little bit. WrestleMania best of show, however we figure that one out. Maybe 2 or 3 episodes that probably ends up covering the Crockett Cup, and then sort of maybe the bigger picture of really what led us to having a Crockett Cup again, and what led us to having a big show for the NWA 70th anniversary. That 2 years ago, how many people knew the NWA was still around?
Yeah, and also, if somebody said, frankly, 2 years ago, if you said to most people, NWA, they're not thinking pro wrestling. They're thinking of the other NWA.
Yes, and those that are thinking of pro wrestling are definitely not thinking of modern pro wrestling. They're thinking of Ric Flair.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where there's so many different. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, our show has kind of been. It's sort of this connection between the past and the present. And I mean, if there's one thing pro wrestling fans love, it's talking about the good old days. And and I think that's what we kind of I enjoy watching the old shows. It brings back a lot of memories. Those warm, fuzzy feelings of being a kid, eating my Fruit Loops on the living room carpet, watching all morning pro wrestling. That's awesome. But I think also the present we see, having watched it for so long, we also see kind of this progression of. I mean, I don't know. For lack of a better term, are we maybe seeing the rebirth of the territory era? And I think overall that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to have a different look now going forward. Obviously, WWE is the guy, and then at least your next 3 Ring of Honor, Impact, MLW. I mean, they're basically national promotions.
Mm-hmm.
They do tours nationwide. They're on nationwide cable. I mean, obviously they're not on USA Network, but they are on nationwide cable. And even Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. That's a name that not too many people will recognize, but they're nationwide on cable.
Yeah. Well, it's like I can remember the old days. We had a period where we started getting USWA shows down in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Also, late night. At like 11, 12 o'clock on Saturdays, you get ECW. And so, I mean, I remember it as like, wow, this is something totally different, and so I think you're seeing this era where, I mean, you're going to get some exposure. And I think, if anything, it's going to be kind of interesting how talent develops, because you sort of, I would assume as a talent, you have an option. Do you want to try to go the path of, get into WWE developmental, go to NXT, maybe get on WWE, or do you kind of go this other path and you may have just as much success? I think the track record is kind of there. You saw guys that can break through either way. But I think if anything, we might start seeing some more well-rounded performers. I think especially those that have to kind of come up through the various promotions, have to go to the different territories. That's, I think, only better for you as a performer. It forces you to learn how to get over and adapt, which I think too often, and we could get into an entire episode about issues with WWE writing and just the entire product, but I think it's going to allow for, guys, hey, if I can get over in Tupelo, Mississippi, I can get over in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I can get over in New York City. I think those skills are something that are very important to have in this industry.
Absolutely. So yeah, that'll be really interesting to see how, how we move forward with everything that's out there. Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think we got some good stuff coming up. I think we got some interesting show ideas, and I think we got some good stuff coming up for the listeners.
Yeah, we sure do. Hey, we appreciate you listening to this one. Went a little bit longer than we had intended, but hey, that's all right. I got some good stuff talked about, and we'll be coming out. Our episode on the April 13th primetime will come out on Saturday. So the day after you listen to this, if you listen to it when it comes out, we'll bring that one out. We'll get the next episode of Ohio Valley Wrestling out, and we may experiment with some different things with OVW to get you some more timely content as far as that goes. But hey, we appreciate everybody listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.